This may or may not work. Um, I had considered titling this little video, How to Stay Married for 50 Years Without Killing Each Other. Then it occurred to me that might sound a little too cynical. And this is not actually a cynical video, but we have been married for close to 50 years. And I wanted to talk about it in the context of what it takes and why it's important. About 20 years ago, my wife Kathy and I were at a wedding, and it was in a really nice reception hall. And the reception hall itself was surrounded on three sides by a really wide corridor. And the corridor had access to a bar, and there was little end tables with comfortable chairs spotted here and there along the corridor, so people could come out, have a drink, and chat casually, or be part of the larger reception and so forth. So now standing there up against a wall or what have you, talking to a friend of mine, and I'm probably having a drink, and I noticed that there was a woman sitting right on a chair right next to the exit to the outside in this hall, and she had a walker. She was handicapped or a little bit disabled somehow, and I would have had no reason to remember that, except that my wife came out of the reception hall at one point and saw me and started walking my way towards me and my friend. Then she noticed this woman sitting by the door next to her walker, and Kathy went over and sat down and started talking to her. She didn't know the woman, nor did I. And I remember telling my friend that half an hour or 45 minutes from now, Kathy's going to come over here, and I'm going to hear this woman's entire resume and life story, which is exactly what happened. The reason I tell this story is because if you're a guy and you've been married any length of time at all, and this may not be 100% true, but I'm pretty sure it's close to it. When you're sitting doing something, reading a paper or whatever, and your wife comes and sits down by you and starts telling a story, it might be the plot of a TV show she just saw, somebody she met, something that happened, something she saw in the news, whatever. But the chances are, when you're sitting there absolutely minding your own business, and your wife sits down and starts telling you a story, a couple of things happen reactively if you're a guy. The first thing is you look for an exit. The second thing you do is you ask yourself, not out loud, but you ask yourself, how long is this story going to take? And look for a way to hustle it along. Okay. There's a reason for this. When a guy tells a story, we look at a story as having two parts. Point A, where the story starts, and point B, which is where the story ends. And our job is to get from point A to point B as quick and effectively as we can, and plow through anything that gets in our way or any distractions. When women tell a story, it's a little more convoluted than that, because they have to get into all the background, who was involved, how they felt about it, what happened, what caused it, all the cause and effects, and all the relationships that may have been involved, and personalities and so forth. So here's a punchline of this entire video. for anybody who's interested in staying married peacefully, if not happily, but hopefully both. And what I'm about to say next may be the most important thing you'll ever hear, next to the gospel, which is designed to save your soul. Other than that, this is pretty important. And here's my punchline on this entire video. When your wife sits down and starts to tell a story, don't look for the door. Don't ask her, what's the point? Don't ask yourself, how long is this going to take? When your wife sits down and starts telling a story, sit there and shut up. Honestly, just be quiet and look and act like you're paying attention and you're really interested. Okay. The reason you need to do that is because men and women are different. Okay. I know that this is not an easy thing to do when we want to get to the point and we want to get from point A to point B. But if we train ourselves to sit and listen and pay attention and try and look alert, I will grant you it's going to hurt, but you're not going to die from it. Neither am I. And here's why it's important. Your wife needs to tell that story because that's who she is. We, as men, need to get from point A to point B as quick as we can because that's who we are. We're designed different. We are. And the world's trying to tell us we're not. It's trying to tell us we're the same. I want to talk about marriage. And I want to talk about it in the context of how hard it is, but how important it is, and how rewarding it is to dig in and not quit. In Ephesians, and I don't have that address in front of me right now, I'm sorry I don't, but the Apostle Paul is telling us, and this is one of the most loaded little verses in the entire Bible. We could spend days trying to unravel it, how it works. But it's simply stated, Paul is telling us, men, love your wives, women, respect your husband. That sounds like a rule. You know, it sounds like something that I need to do or somebody's going to hit me over the head. It's not a rule, it's a principle. It's how things work, and it's how we're designed. Women are designed for love and for relationships. Men are designed to fix things, to fight, to conquer, to get from point A to point B directly, and to plow through anything that gets in our way, because that's who we are. We're designed to take care of things. Women, frankly, are designed to take care of people. We're designed to take care of people too, but in a different way. The reason this is important, because we ignore it. We want to get married and fall in love so that we can be happy. Okay. It's not about happy. The happy will come, but it won't be coming because we have these warm and fuzzy feelings that last forevermore. It will come because we enter into a covenant before God, and that covenant is not grounded in our feelings, which tell us when the glow wears off, I can move on. I cannot tell you how many women and I'm sure men like this too, but mostly I heard it from women, every one of whom was in the process of walking out on their marriage. And the standard line was, God wants me to be happy. God wants you to be obedient. He wants you to be faithful, and he wants you to dig in and stick it out. And that applies to men and to women. So what does it take? And why is it important? I spent 12 years going into the local jail system here and dealing with juveniles who were in trouble with the law and ended up incarcerated, normally while their case was being processed through. I asked the following two questions 800 times. How many of you are living with both of your natural parents? And how many of you have ever attended anything other than a public school system? 26 out of 800 answers were living with both their natural parents. A lot of these kids cycled through more than once, so it wasn't 800 individual kids. It might have been 500 or 600. Nevertheless, that's a perfect storm. And when you have a public education system that cannot teach kids to read or to write in cursive, but they pump them full of all this bullshit that says you have every right to be happy, you have every right to express yourself, you have every right to your own truth, you've got a problem on your hands. Out of all those questions I asked, there was only 6 that had ever attended a public or a parochial school, and 3 that were homeschooled. So you've got this perfect storm of broken families and a narrative that they're getting every day at the public schools that is in direct opposition to the values most parents want to instill in their children. If we're going to fight that, the number one thing that we can do is stay married. And the number one way to do that is for men to love their wives, meaning to sacrifice themselves on behalf of their wives and their children and their household, to go out and conquer, to fix things, to defend things, to take care of things. And women, the number one thing you can do to build a strong marriage is respect your husband. Our world is awash in sex and romance and all that, but I can guarantee you can be the best bed partner in the world, but it won't compare in any measure to the foundation you can build in your marriage by simply respecting your husband. So what does it take? I mentioned that we're in a covenant. A covenant is the most ancient and sacred form of a contract ever devised. In ancient times, if two parties entered into an agreement, they would normally slaughter an animal, and sometimes they'd eat it, and sometimes they would sacrifice it or burn it, but they would slaughter this animal to demonstrate through the shedding of its blood just how serious and binding this agreement is between us. And what they were saying is, let this be done to me if I break faith with this agreement that we're making. Further, they would take an oath. That oath was normally taken in the name of a third party who was greater in power and authority than either of the two principles to the agreement. So, by entering into an agreement or a contract with someone, we slaughter this animal, and then we take an oath in the name of somebody more powerful. It's designed so that if either one of us breaks our oath, that third party has the power and authority to enforce it. That's the theory behind it. Those contracts were not grounded in the blood of the animal that was sacrificed. It was not even grounded in the fear of the person in authority who could enforce it. Those things that were critically important, and they should be a deterrent to breaking faith with our word. But ultimately, the strength of any contract is grounded in the character and the integrity of the people entering into that contract and that agreement. In a marriage, when you take a vow, and it used to be always a vow that says for better or worse, till death do us part, those aren't empty words. You're putting your character and your integrity on the line and saying, even if my circumstances change, my commitment to this covenant marriage will not change. The reason we get out of marriages, like every other contract, is because either our circumstances change or our feelings change, and we think, okay, now I got a way out. I don't need to do this anymore. That's not the way covenants work. The person you entered into that agreement with is now depending on you. Your husband or your wife has staked their entire future on the simple confidence that you're a person of integrity that won't quit, regardless of circumstances and regardless of feelings. There's going to be days where you're going to feel like killing each other. We've been married. We have not been married 50 years yet. We got about 2 months to go still. So we've still got time, and it's easy to sit here and say, this is how it's done for 50 years, but we haven't made it yet. We could still still kill each other, but we won't. And here's why. Because when your feelings change or your circumstances change, that is exactly the time we all need to dig in, reach deep inside of ourselves, and say, I will not quit. That's not who I am. Kathy and I started this dance just about 50 years ago, and it's been a ride. There are days when we probably would have liked to have killed each other, but here's the bottom line. We raised our family. We stuck it out, and we started this together, and we're going to finish it together, because that's the way God designed it. And that's the character and integrity he wants to build into us for the sake of his design on how the nuclear family works, for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. We're not going to quit. And my encouragement to anybody who may ever trip over this video, and I'm not saying there's no excuse ever for a divorce. If you're being physically abused, or your kids are being abused physically, sexually, whatever, there may come a point where you just flat out have to get out and trust God to walk you through it. But those situations are rare. Most divorces in our day and age, and this is pushed by our culture and our movies and entertainment and everything else, says when the glow wears off, move on. You have every right to be happy. You have an obligation to be faithful and to stick it out. If you do that, I can tell you a couple things are going to happen. Your children whether they express it or not, somewhere in their heart of hearts, they're going to thank you and call you blessed. And for the world that is collapsing around us, Kathy and I and other families that we know are going to be a light in a dark place. We're going to be those isolated islands, those occasional stories you trip over that says this is how it's done. We won't quit. And I can tell you that if you refuse to quit and dig in, it's worth it. And it's also necessary for the sake of your children and for the sake of our civilization. Ladies, if you have a tendency to nag or criticize your wife, Solomon in the Old Testament, who was considered the smartest man that ever lived, I guess, he said it's better for a man to retreat to his roof and live in a corner under a blanket up there to have to live in the house with a nagging woman. You have no idea. I think most women have no idea the impact you have on your husbands with your criticism, with your nagging, and with your indifference to showing respect. We need that. And the person we need it most from is from our wives. You're the most important person in our life next to God himself. And there is very few things that are more fortifying, encouraging, and rewarding than to have a woman by your side who either adores you or acts like she adores you. And if you don't deserve that respect, it probably means you need it all the more because you're not getting it from the world. And if you can be an encourager to your husband, there are few things, if any, that will strengthen your marriage more than that. And my advice would be to every woman that ever may trip over this, when you're about to open your mouth and say something to your husband, particularly something critical, ask yourself this question: is what I'm about to say going to make my husband feel more warm and fuzzy or less warm and fuzzy toward me? And then you'll know what to do with that answer. And men, we need to take care of our wives. Our idea of what they need and their idea of what they need are two different things. I have a very large problem personally walking next to my wife. She walks too slow. And I walk faster. For years, she has been harping at me to slow down and walk next to her. And I'm a guy. I keep thinking, how, why can't we get where we're going quicker? Why can't you walk faster? And then she'll be stopping and looking at things and this and that. And I finally got it. I finally figured it out. I just need to slow down and make sure she's next to me. And it gets frustrating because, it might only be 200 feet from the car door to the restaurant door. And all of a sudden I turn and look and she's not there. And I'm thinking, what is there to stop and look at in the parking lot on the way to the door? But if she does that, I need to pay attention and stop. A lot of this is common sense and discipline. Once we understand we're different, she tells a story different than we do. She is looking at almost everything through the eyes of relationships. We're looking at almost everything through the eyes of how can we get from here to there quicker and more directly? How can we fix this? How can we, kick over anything that's in our way. And we need to recognize we're designed different. Men are designed to provide, women are designed to nurture and take care of people. And so my encouragement, and I'll try and end it on this. If you're a guy, and probably if you're a woman too, let's say you're in a parking lot and you see a pickup truck that you really like, and think, I got to have that truck. The first thing we do is check for the price tag and say, okay, what does this cost? Okay. In marriage, that is exactly the wrong question to ask, because a smart man, a perceptive man, isn't going to look at that truck or whatever and say, what does it cost? I know it's going to cost. He's going to look at it and say, okay, what's it worth? I will tell you point blank, if you decide to stay married, to not quit, it's going to cost. But I can also tell you, it's going to be worth it. So if you're still here, thanks for watching.